Con ustedes, Jared Phipps, VP Worldwide Sales Engineering de SentinelOne.
Hi, really happy to be with you today on the IT Solutions Day for 2020, and really happy to be here supporting MAPS. Definitely been a great partner of SentinelOne and someone I've worked with over the years, so it's really an honor to be here today. My name is Jared Phipps. I'm the Vice President of Sales Engineering at SentinelOne, and I wanted to talk to you today about cybercrime. It's a topic that's always been in this industry, but I think there's some interesting angles I would like to explore today. Number one is the overlay of nation states into the cybercrime arena, which we have not historically seen, and also some of the emerging trends in ransomware and the prevalence of ransomware. So if I look holistically across the SentinelOne customer base, we have millions and millions and millions of endpoints that we're protecting every single day. And what we can see in terms of attempted attacks is a dramatic increase of what we would call fileless malware. And the fileless malware is something that's not a portable executable. Instead, it's a script like active content embedded inside of a document. In particular, we see a dramatic increase in the use of PowerShell in the cybercrime attacks in particular. The other interesting aspect is the notion of the different operating systems that are being targeted. The notion that I get when I visit clients and I visit prospects is that the primary threat vector is Windows. And while that is the case, I think people underestimate the exposure to hackers and cybercrime that is opened up by both Mac and Linux. And you can see here from the overall volume of attacks that we stop that we do see a lot of threats on the other operating systems. Now, traditionally, we've required AV or reputation-based services to help us provide the security in these environments. One of the things that I've found really interesting is that the vast majority of the times, the attacks that are being used are completely unknown to reputation services like VirusTotal. And if I look at it from the portable executables or the binary files, 77% of the time, those are compiled on demand before they're sent, and they have no reputation awareness. So if you're using any sort of a protection product that's based on a feed of hashes, this limits the effectiveness of those types of products. The reality, though, is that cybercrime is moving into documents and HTA files, and 96% of the time that those files are transferred or used in an attack, they are completely unknown to reputation services. And the reason is that every single one of these is customized for the attack, and it's super easy to create a new script. So it happens really, really fast. If I look at it from a volume of attacks and I classify the volumes by percentages, you'll see that executable files are still the commodity malwares, the commodity noise, but the reality is they're not very successful. Where the cyber criminals are having success is in the top of this stack. And they're using documents to gain entry into the environment, and they're using fileless methods to do all of the work after that. Now, I want to talk a little bit about North Korea. Most of the time when we're talking about cybercrime, everybody's thinking of the Fin6, Fin7, the cybercrime groups that did Drydex and all of these things. Well, North Korea as an entity, as a country, has had a cyber attack philosophy for many, many years. And there's two different APT groups that have been operating. APT 38 is the cybercrime Blue North. They typically target the banking systems. They go after SWIFT servers, and they'll do wire transfers. This has been historically where North Korea has done a lot of monetization on that side of the house, but primarily focused on banks in Western countries. APT 37 was the government arm of the North Korea Lazarus Group, and they would focus on website defacements intelligence gathering, primarily against South Korea, in Southeast Asia, and against Western governments. Now, earlier in February of this year, SentinelOne researchers were able to make a direct link between North Korea and the TrickBot Anchor malware sets. Now, this is really significant because TrickBot is primarily used, well, what I would say is there's some significant ransomware campaigns that primarily use TrickBot as its delivery mechanism, and it's essentially, it's like its SCCM, or its maintenance delivery updates. And so when we're looking at this, what we're seeing is the potential opportunity for North Korea to be entering a new era of cybercrime, where they're not just focused on the SWIFT banking systems. They could still go after monetization methods like they have in the past, but then they could drop ransomware at the final stage on the way out. So definitely something that we're keeping an eye on and we're looking at, but also very intriguing that you would have a nation state actor potentially getting involved in ransomware. So a lot of people will ask me, how did North Korea get this good at ransomware? And where do they, how they get good at cybercrime in general? What I'd like to remind people is that North Korea has a Soviet-style education system where they will identify at a very young age the aptitude of certain children. And if you show a really good aptitude and intellect for math, then you're going to get pulled into specific schools all the way through the university system, and that will affect which type of military jobs you can work in. The most promising will go into Bureau 121, which is their intelligence arm. And they will get advanced training in Shenyang, which is in China, across the border, probably about 100 miles. And then the best of the best will be implanted in countries where they're allowed to work with a Korean visa or via visa via China. So we see this happening, and we see them being able to move intelligence agents and conduct attacks, not just from North Korea, but conduct attacks from other locations around the world on behalf of the North Korean government. So in terms of 2020 and 2021, what do we look for? What do we see from North Korea? What are the potential options? The cybercrime side of them, the APT-38, they have always been a very stealthy, a very careful threat actor. They move low and slow is what we would call it here. Seeing an increased appetite in cryptocurrency. The first targets we saw North Korea take on cryptocurrency were actually against crypto wallets of individual citizens in South Korea. Since then, there's some small trial campaigns running for ransomware, and they're likely looking for easier ways to monetize. We already know that North Korea has involved themselves in Bitcoin, so they're very familiar with cryptocurrencies. I certainly think that there's a strong possibility that we see increased activity in North Korea in the ransomware space, and definitely in terms of leveraging cryptocurrencies in their work. Now, the government side, the APT-37 side of what we see happening in North Korea, I don't think there's going to be a lot of changes. You'll see them remain focused on intelligence gathering, remain focused on propaganda, leveraging South Korea and Western governments selectively, along with key Western enterprises, if needed to defend the regime per se. Now, the cybercrime group, obviously, or the cybercrime arena, is much larger than North Korea, and there's a listing of cybercrime groups. The ones that I like to track are the ones that are tracked by the FIN designations and easiest identified through MITRE. But when I'm looking at them, it's a bit difficult to attribute to any one individual or group consistently over time. Oftentimes, these groups are dynamic. They can come together and form together for a specific campaign. So you'll see elements of a FIN 6 or a FIN 8 pulled together in new campaigns that they run. Overall, though, there's a substantial interest in modernizing the way that they work. And I'll get into a little bit more of this later, but we know that they are able to operate within Russia pretty much undisturbed as long as they don't affect or alter business interests of Russian citizens. And so it's the notion of turning a blind eye to their behavior. So the notion that cyber criminals have historically focused on very selective organizations, trading firms, finance firms, areas where they could target money, so retailers, but going after the credit card processing systems, ransomware has completely changed that philosophy. In the last 24 months, the rise and increase in the use of ransomware has absolutely skyrocketed, and it opens up every single industry as a potential victim to ransomware. So it's a very, very lucrative business, but it also means that the targets that cyber criminals can go after is now substantially wider. So when I'm looking at the financial forecast and the outlook for 2020, I'm looking at probably a large, significant increase in ransomware. Today, we're seeing around 100 or more cyber insurance claims being made for ransomware incidences every day. Very, very few of those get published in the news. And there is no obligation for companies to disclose or make public any of the ransomware campaigns unless there's a loss of confidential information, health information, or PII. So you don't read and you don't hear about the vast majority of ransomware campaigns that are going on. That being said, the companies who are going through these campaigns and they're having to recover from them, they're dealing with a substantial amount of pain as they do it. Now, all of this being said, what we can see is in the dark web, in the criminal enterprises, a definite increase in the infrastructure that lets the criminals carry out ransomware campaigns. So ransomware as a service, and you're thinking of things like the TrickBot and the various botnet operators that are allowing these services to be used as transport delivery, maintenance update deliveries, this service infrastructure that really wasn't seen in anywhere near this level 3 or 4 years ago is now dramatically rising. Ransomware as a service is now a concept. So you can take a limited number of dollars, maybe $150 to $500 in Bitcoin, and you can gain access to a ransomware as a service platform. And then the only agreement is that whatever proceeds you make on that platform is then split between you and the platform operator. Now fortunately, some of the really well-known services, one, they get shut down quickly, and so it forces them to continually regenerate, but it also creates this really large market of aspiring copycats who don't necessarily do as good of a job as the originals. And so we see a lot of cases where people are paying money into new infrastructure as service in the crime groups, and then just it doesn't perform. So we see a lot of immaturity in that space still as well. The Linux and the crypto mining is pretty interesting. So historically, if you targeted a Linux device, you're either using that to jump into different aspects of the enterprise, or you're dropping it and using it to crypto mine off of the CPU cycles. We're now starting to see ransomware for Linux emerging as a new category. And this has some pretty interesting implications as well. So if I look at TrickBot as just one example of the sophistication, TrickBot will inject into all common web browsers. And the goal of this is to really intercept online banking credentials. That's what it was done for originally, right? What they've done is repurposed the TrickBot now to use it for letting people find domain admin accounts. And so one of the biggest trends I see in ransomware right now is exploitation of RDP and the use of domain level credentials in these attacks. And when a lot of companies gone to work from home strategies, part of that work from home strategy due to COVID is to open up remote workforces, RDP being one of them. If you've opened up RDP and you do not have it behind two-factor authentication or VPN, your chances of being targeted by a ransomware actor are very, very high. So definitely something to be aware of. So why are cyber criminals moving to ransomware versus any of the other ways that they have monetized cybercrime in the past? Number one is its speed. When you actually execute the ransomware attack, you can take down an entire enterprise in a matter of 10 to 15 minutes. It can happen incredibly fast. Individual boxes can be taken down in under 2 minutes. The payout is another aspect of speed. So if you can cripple an organization, make it very painful for them, their chances of paying you are faster, and that payment is coming via cryptocurrency. So that cycle of trying to get access to the cash after the crime's been committed is dramatically shortened. So it definitely employs a smash and grab mentality where you can hit an organization and receive payment very quickly. Now, cryptocurrency itself is another big element of this. Cryptocurrency has provided an actual payment mechanism that allows companies to, or that allows the cyber crimes to profit like they were a company. What do I mean? Well, they no longer have to figure out how to launder money and go through mules. You can simply receive the Bitcoin. That's typically still the gold standard of payments in the ransomware space. But you also have North Korea as a full government that's entered into crypto markets, and that stabilized those markets, to be honest. It's given a very large player, and that's given a bit of legitimacy to it. So you have an attack that you can execute pretty easily, and you have a payout method that doesn't involve wire transfers, that doesn't involve as easy of a way to track, and that's facilitated by cryptocurrency. But now you also have a third party in the payment scheme here, and that's the cyber insurance companies, who by law have to get a company back operational to address what they've offered in their policy. So many times, those organizations are being pulled into the payment cycle. So now you have cyber, and we figured out how to do it fast, how to get paid by cryptocurrency with the understanding that it's going to be paid by a cyber insurance company. It's just created this perfect storm for crypto payments to happen for ransomware. So if we look at historically, a breach, which is something that would typically have to be disclosed because it has data loss, you're seeing about 2,000 of those in 2019, whereas an incident, which ransomware can be claimed as, you're seeing at 40,000. And I've already given you sort of a heads up that the impact for ransomware is much higher, but we're talking about a huge potential available market in ransomware as available as cybercrime was. This is why the shift is happening, because the cyber criminals have figured out where the money's at, and that's what they're going after. If we look at things like Emotet, this is essentially one of the TrickBot Emotet and then Riek or some other ransomware payload. This is a very, very common aspect of this, but it's becoming a go-to installer used to deliver other malware. So we saw this used in earlier stages of ransomware before the Maze group kicked in, kind of like the SCCM of the ransomware world. You can see that from the workload and the persistent, or the way that it operates, that it's really being considered almost like a maintenance program now. So definitely maturing in that organization. If you look at the ransomware dropped by that, you could see that it's taking 149 seconds to hit this machine on a total execution. So pretty interesting there. Now, what this means and what I want to kind of talk to is, at SentinelOne, we focus an awful lot on automation and artificial intelligence and behavioral analysis. When it comes to dealing with ransomware, you're not going to be able to address it at human speed. So it turns into an instance of code-on-code warfare, meaning ransomware can try to kick off. You have to have something that's not looking for a signature, that's not looking for any sort of an antivirus definition. You need something that can use behavioral analysis to determine when it's behaving badly and make its conviction based on that behavior and do that at real time. So I would describe that as code-on-code warfare, and that's what SentinelOne is providing. If I'm following some of the typical trends and the typical things to look for, you'll typically see either an HTA file, and that's becoming really popular with like the Maze group, for example, or some sort of a WinWord process that immediately kicks off a PowerShell. PowerShell is definitely the script of choice being used here. So in your organizations, if you're trying to figure out what can I look for to help stop this, this is a great sequence to look for. Look for the win word kicking off a PowerShell and that PowerShell connecting externally. If you don't understand exactly what it's doing, that needs to be cut off immediately. So let me give you a couple of case studies of being hit by ransomware, what this is like and what this impact is like. This one is back from 2018. It happened in the right before Christmas, actually, and there always seems to be some case that happens right before Christmas. But this was a manufacturing company, and I see a lot of targeting of manufacturing companies for ransomware. Manufacturing companies get their production line shut down, their ability to make money is shut down. They pay the ransoms probably the fastest of the entire category. This is resulting in them becoming a prime target of ransomware operators. So manufacturing has always been a hotspot. What happened in this particular case was they were hit with ransomware that was delivered via the Emotet dropper. Their ERP systems, their email systems, their Active Directory servers, all of their systems were still on premise. They weren't using anything in the cloud. All of those systems were taken offline. SCCM, Jamf, the ability to deploy software was taken offline, and the backup systems had been manually disrupted prior. There were no available non-corrupted backups for this organization to leverage. So the insurance company provided an IR firm, and in this particular case, the ransom demand was $850,000. If this was in 2020, the ransomware demand would be upwards of $10 million now. That's how substantially more these have been increasing. But the reality is, it's oftentimes very problematic once your environment's encrypted to recover from it. And this organization felt it. You're talking the middle of the holiday season, employees are struggling to get paid. They can't produce any new product. They can't bill. They can't receive cash. Their business was on the verge of going out of business. And so the insurance company has sent in an incident response firm and sent in an additional incident response firm afterwards. Now, they bought the decryption tool and they deployed it, but when the machines were getting decrypted, they just got re-encrypted again. And so what they ended up doing is dropping SentinelOne on the box immediately after it was decrypted, and then SentinelOne would stop the follow-on encryption activities, and the company was able to get back online. So in a matter of days, the entire company was turned back online and when it was back up to running. Now, this one is a tech provider, and this is actually a completely different case, but it also goes to show some of the interesting things that can occur in our industry. In this particular case, the company had identified 2 Emotet infections, and they were aware that Emotet was typically a precursor to RIAC as a ransomware, and so they called in an IR firm worried that they might have an outbreak happening. Once the IR firm got on site, they deployed SentinelOne everywhere, and they immediately ran scans, and they found no other instances of RIAC ransomware in the organization at all. Now, the CISO, who is the security officer, was walked out of the building, which means he was being fired, in process of legally being fired, at the same time that they were deploying 42,000 SentinelOne endpoints. And what we found out a little over a week later is that there was no ransomware outbreak. One of the SOC senior analysts who was trying to advance their career had been making recommendations that the CISO had not decided to implement, and they actually staged an event with the intention of moving the CISO out and being able to move their own career forward. So this is probably one of the more interesting stories of an insider threat. Again, this goes back to the need to have visibility into your enterprise and understanding what's going on, but also around a major campaign like ransomware that's gaining momentum, how that paranoia can also be used to a disadvantage. So I just wanted to pass on some of these informations today, and I think if I could give you a couple of high-level pieces of advice. Number one, RDP connections exposed should absolutely be behind a VPN or at a minimum 2-factor authentication. If you don't have a really valid reason for letting HTA files across your email as attachments, then just strip them as attachments, as allowed attachments in email. A lot of the modern attacks, especially with Maze, are coming on HTA. Number 3 is when the ransomware crime groups are getting in, they pre-stage everything with .ps1 files. And so if there's .ps1 files that you have around your organization, look for them, find them, verify the validity of them. If they're not valid, it could be an indicator that you're in initial stages of something going on. So with that, I just want to thank Maps for the opportunity to be here. Really grateful for this opportunity, and hope you enjoy the rest of the day.
Agradecemos a Jared Phipps por su participación en el IT Solutions Day.